Creative freedom is a death sentence for the majority of creators. When the sky is the limit, when we're staring at a cursor blinking in our face or a blank page on our desk, a lot of us freeze. I know that I do. Analysis paralysis kicks in and it becomes really challenging to make or commit to any type of decision. So in this video, we're going to talk about how and when creativity works best so that you can finally get out of your own head. So in my job as a fight coordinator for major films like Marvel's Thunderbolts, as well as Ballerina in the John Wick universe, the hardest part by far in the process for me is the initial stages, the pre-production stages, the first few weeks of production, because at this stage, you pretty much have ultimate creative freedom. There's no real constraints. The sandbox is super huge. You can choose kind of any weapon you want. The sky's kind of the limit. In theory, this amount of freedom would sound good, but more often than not, it's pretty paralyzing. The other challenge at this part of the process or beginning any creative project is that at this stage, things are kind of abstractly just living in your head. You don't have anything shot or laid down, so you can't get any type of feedback from anybody, whether that's the creatives on the project or, more importantly, yourself. You're still in this exploration and browsing stage, which feels like it should be creative, but in reality, it's like pre-creativity. You don't have anything to judge, because when you think about it, creativity is really just a series of ideas that you have that you judge against one another, iterate on, shape, and then they end up becoming the final idea that ends up in your project or whatever you're trying to create. In my case, choreography for a film. So how do we get through this really annoying part of the process when everything is kind of up for grabs and it's impossible to even get started? Well, on the movie Thunderbolts, when I was fight coordinating, there was this one afternoon where we were going into a rehearsal space to shoot a previs or a concept, a fight concept for the film. And when we walked in, the director and a couple other people were there waiting for us. There was some type of miscommunication, and this turned into a director's showcase instead of us shooting a concept that we hadn't even fully fleshed out yet. So all of a sudden, I was thrown into the hot seat, and to put it plainly, I was shitting my pants. So I'll set the stage for you. We had 15 minutes, no rehearsal, very loose choreography. And because this was a Marvel film, to say that I was under big budget movie pressure is a massive understatement. But the thing about pressure is that pressure forces you to make decisions. And with creativity, especially in the beginning, making a decision, any decision, is the best thing that you can do. So after talking to the director for a few minutes, or stalling, if I'm honest, we are made aware of some constraints. And constraint number one is a camera thing. He wants the entire fight from beginning to end to be a oneer, which is basically one continuous shot with no other cuts or camera angles. The other thing that he wants camera-wise is he wants it to be a top shot. He wants this one take to be a top shot. And this becomes a challenge pairing these two things together, because with a oneer, you can't make mistakes because you don't have any other angles or cameras to cut away to hide those mistakes. And when you're shooting as a top shot, it's a lot easier to make mistakes because you can't stack punches in a traditional way, and I'll show you what I mean. So stacking punches traditionally is pretty simple. As long as my fist crosses between the imaginary line that goes from my camera's lens to her face, the punch will sell. So in a shot like this, or if we were to switch to a profile, which is also very common, same thing. I change the punch to a straight, she just moves her head. Super simple. But with a top shot, these traditional standard kind of workhorse punches don't work anymore. If I throw a hook punch, there's a ton of space. If I throw a straight punch, there's a ton of space. There's no real way for me to sell those. I can put a hook punch under her chin, but it becomes really, really hard to sell, and I'm probably gonna end up punching her in the face at some point on accident because it's just so close. You could also go to the top of the head, but that just looks pretty bad, and I don't like to do that. So then a lot of times what we end up stuck with is these body shots that actually have to physically make contact, or grabbing the person and throwing them, which is kind of what we ended up doing in this fight. So in my situation, when you're designing a fight that you want to be a oneer or a top shot or something like that, you're gonna wanna impose some boundaries on yourself so that this thing can ultimately survive production. So it becomes things like making sure that things are easily repeatable. You're not doing big flashy moves that will fatigue everyone that they have to repeat in a oneer over and over again. no wires or special effects that require perfect timing and require a lot of time to set up. What's interesting about these boundaries and constraints is that it doesn't hurt creativity, it actually inspires it, and it eliminates the bad options. The other major constraint came in when I was finally able to show him some of the fight concepts and choreography that we had come up with. The original concept had all of the goons attacking Yelena from both sides of the hallway, but after we started to show him this, within a few seconds he was like, guys, I only want people coming from one direction, which pretty much nullified all of the choreography that we had come up with. So I'm having to recreate an entire fight scene from scratch in front of this director within a few minutes in real time. And I just started going. I pulled from familiar shapes and concepts from the past and started merging it with things that we were coming up with in real time. And we were all in this kind of collective flow, and it was probably one of the coolest things that I've ever experienced. But the important part is this, is that that type of flow was only possible because of the constraints and the boundaries that I was forced to be in with no time to overthink. And that is the point of all this, is that creativity thrives when it's in a box, when rules remove our ability to overthink, and when we don't have time for analysis. Being able to decide what to remove is the skill, and execution actually comes from what we talked about before, which was judgment, judging one idea over another, and then learning how to subtract the ones that aren't working and refine the ones that are. And I see this all the time in filmmakers and content creators, and even in my own past. Things like overshooting instead of just committing, and edits that could lose entire sections and say the same thing but more powerfully. And the bottom line is that most creators aren't stuck because they lack ideas. Most creators are stuck because they won't remove any. And the biggest thing that I think that I learned from that Thunderbolts experience is that constraints don't limit creativity. They unleash it.